The U.S. has been steadily ratcheting up the pressure on China's sea forces in a way that could lower the threshold for conflict in the South China Sea, already a hotbed of tension and dispute. The U.S. is signaling a tougher stance toward the Chinese maritime militia, a paramilitary sea force disguised as a fishing fleet, and known to harass foreign rivals to enforce China's vast sovereignty claims in the contested waterway. The Chinese maritime militia thrives within the shadows of plausible deniability, according to Andrew Erickson, a leading expert at the U.S. Naval War College, but it can no longer hide like it once could. The Department of Defense first called attention to the maritime militia in its 2017 report on China's military power. The report explained that China uses its commercial fishing fleets to engage in gray zone aggression, to enforce maritime claims and advance its interests in ways that are calculated to fall below the threshold of provoking conflict. It wasn't until this year, though, that the U.S. really began putting pressure on the militia forces. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral John Richardson warned his Chinese counterpart during a meeting in Beijing in January 2019 that the U.S. Navy will treat Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels as combatants, and respond to provocations the same way it would a Chinese Navy ship, the Financial Times reported. In March 2019, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo publicly assured the Philippines that the U.S. would come to its defense in the event that it was attacked in the South China Sea. Any armed attack, the Secretary explained, on Philippine forces, aircraft or public vessels in the South China Sea will trigger mutual defense obligations. U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines Sung Kim clarified the earlier assurances on June 14, 2019, telling reporters that U.S. security guarantees apply to potential acts of aggression by the Chinese maritime militia. Any armed attack, I would think that would include government-sanctioned militias, the ambassador explained. According to the Philippine Star, he did not say what type of behavior would constitute an armed attack. The increased pressure is intended to change China's strategic calculus in the disputed waterway, experts argue. By injecting greater uncertainty about how the U.S. will respond to China's gray zone coercion, Bonnie Glaser, a China expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told the Financial Times, the U.S. hopes to deter Chinese destabilizing maritime behavior, including its reliance on Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels to intimidate its smaller neighbors. At the same time, it potentially makes it easier for a lower-level dispute between China and its neighbors to escalate, especially considering the ambiguity surrounding both the U.S. deterrence posture and the role of the maritime militia. Incidents involving Chinese fishing vessels, potential members of the maritime militia, are frequent occurrences in the South China Sea. It is unclear exactly what kind of incident might trigger U.S. defense obligations. For instance, in April 2019, more than 200 Chinese fishing vessels allegedly swarmed Fitu Island, a Philippine-occupied territory in the Spratly Islands. And, last week, a suspected Chinese vessel allegedly rammed a Philippine ship in the South China Sea, sinking it and then sailing off as nearly 24 Filipino fishermen fought for their lives in open water. China has denied allegations of misconduct. The U.S. and the Philippines discussed the placement of an upgraded rocket system in the South China Sea to defend against Chinese expansion in the disputed territory, the South China Morning Post reported. Regional security experts told SCMP that while Washington and Manila have been collaborating to deter Beijing's increased militarization of the islands, they have been unable to close a deal because a high-mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS, could be too expensive. The Lockheed Martin rocket system would be able to launch long-range, precision-guided rockets which could strike a Chinese presence in the Spratly Islands, an expert told the Post. The Spratly Islands are a disputed cluster of islands, reefs, and atolls located close to the center of the South China Sea. The Philippine Defense Department was allocated P188.2 billion, $3.6 billion, in 2019, a 34% increase from the previous year, though it pales in comparison to the United States' massive $686 billion defense budget for 2019. The Pentagon assured the enduring alliance between the U.S. and Philippines and agreed on the need to increase interoperability between the two militaries. And in February, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said any attack on Philippine aircrafts or ships in the South China Sea would trigger a response from the U.S. China's island building and military activities in the South China Sea threaten Philippine sovereignty, security and therefore economic livelihood, as well as that of the United States, Pompeo said at a joint press conference in Manila in February. China has been steadily increasing its military presence in the South China Sea, one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, in recent years, according to a Defense Department report. Beijing has reclaimed more than 2,900 acres of land since 2013. Satellite images also show increased activity on several reefs in the Spratly Islands, including reported helipads, airstrips, and radar structures, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. The Philippine Foreign Ministry said it filed a diplomatic protest over the presence of hundreds of Chinese vessels near Thitu Island, which the Philippines holds claims to. The American military vessel was earlier spotted passing through the disputed waters of the South China Sea despite numerous demands from China, who has a significant military presence in the region, calling for the U.S. to stop such provocations. The U.S. Marine Corps have been testing a concept of a so-called lightning carrier during joint drills with the Philippines military, Business Insider reported. The idea of this concept is to load an America-class amphibious assault ship, such as the USS Wasp currently participating in these drills, with 10 or even more F-35 Lightning II jets, twice the amount normally loaded on such vessels. U.S. Marines are planning to use such Lightning carriers as a supplement for big Navy carriers. According to a Marines Corps spokesman, they will take full advantage of the amphibious assault ship as a sea base, but at the same time will provide a significant air force with strike capabilities. In comparison to regular carriers, Lightning carriers have a significantly smaller effective range when they counter naval and aerial aggression or conduct strikes. This downside is caused by the need to use the F-35B modification, suited for short takeoffs and vertical landing necessary on amphibious ships. Deck speed modification has a smaller operational range and effective payload than the F-35C, a modification used on U.S. Navy carriers. Another drawback of Lightning carriers is that they can carry far less fighter jets than supercarriers can. Although they can theoretically be fitted to house up to 1620 F-35, the number pales in comparison to over 75 jets that can be carried by Gerald R. Ford-class carriers. The drills are part of U.S.-Philippine exercises, which reportedly carried out drills regarding the possible recapture of a smaller island with joint forces. The Philippines control several islands in South China Sea, whose waters are contested by several states, including China. Earlier, the amphibious assault ship, USS Wasp, was spotted in the sea's waters, despite Beijing continuously insisting that Washington must stop sending military ships to the region, calling such acts provocations.